I'd like to welcome everybody to Digital Transformation and Organizational Change, Fostering a Holistic Mindset. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Joseph Yanoska, a CIO with TruWest, and Ziying Magic Tan, Senior Principal here at Alcor Solutions. Joe joined TruWest in 2019 as Chief Information Officer. Prior to joining the company, he spent nearly 20 years at American Greetings Interactive, where he served as Head of Technology, and over 5 years with KeyBank, where he served as the Project and Development Manager for their first online banking website. Joe earned a Bachelor of Education degree in Math and Computer Science from Bowling Green State University. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Pam, thank you for having me here. So I guess first and foremost, I should probably introduce TruWest, which is the company I work for here. So I have the pleasure of working for a couple of entrepreneurs. So TruWest in itself is a holding company. We actually run 5 different companies underneath here. And I think it's important to understand that for the purposes of this discussion in digital transformation. We first have a company named MRK, and this company mainly plays in the security space as a managed security service provider. We provide fractional CISO services, so if you need somebody to come in to help with your security strategy, and then we also provide SOC services. So if you need somebody to monitor your network and look for the bad guys, we can provide a lot of those services, as well as we have a number of relationships with vendors to help bring in, depending on what you need. We have another company called TRG, and the best way to think about this company is if it's a device that scans a barcode, we can sell it to you, we can manage it for you, we can deploy it for you, we can prepare it for you, and we can, when that device hits its end of life, we can destroy it for you in a secure manner. So really, think of point of sale devices, warehouse management devices, all of that good stuff. Then we have a company called River Capital. They are in the leasing space. So if those devices that I just talked about, you don't want to buy and you want to lease, we have a company that can help you do that. So it's very synergistic. We then have a company called River SaaS Capital, and this is very different in that it's really in the lending space. Best way to think about it is kind of a venture capital for SaaS companies. So SaaS companies at a certain maturity point who might need another round of funding, they can come to us, and we can work together to see how that what we would do with them. And then the last one, and quite honestly the most fun one, and what most people know us for here in the greater Cleveland area, is a microbrew, right? So what goes best with technology and financial companies? A brewing company. So we spend, so we have a true microbrew. We have a tap house, and it's quite fun to work, on the problems that you have there. I volunteer often to be their quality control manager, but it creates a wide variety of fun companies to work with. And as you can think from a digital transformation standpoint, each one of those are going to have their own unique needs. So I think that'll set up our conversation here in a good spot. So
absolutely. Yes, thank you for that. And
sure.
We'll meet at the brewery after this.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'd also like to introduce Magic Tan. He is a Senior Principal for Customer Success here at Alcor Solutions. He has led a number of large digital transformation initiatives over his career for Fortune 1000 companies and consulted in nearly every industry across the globe. Welcome, Magic.
Thank you, Pamela. Excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Joe, for the intro into TruWest, and Magic, thank you so much for being here. So I'm interested with the different types of businesses that you're involved with TruWest. How do you think about digital transformation? How do you drive digital transformation? And what are some of those key drivers for those decisions?
Sure. So in thinking about it, it was really on day one of my agenda when I joined TruWest 2 years ago. And really, when you have a scenario where you have 5 companies, it's best to think about it holistically, like the title of our talk here says. So we spent, or at least I, with a number of team members, spent some time really thinking through each business, trying to figure out where technology can really help drive that business forward in either helping us be much more efficient, much more secure, or much more, or we could drive revenue, right, as at the top line. So those were kind of the things that we thought through. And then the last piece of that is, where can I have common systems that can help drive each of the businesses, right? So from like a ERP accounting perspective, like we can usually accomplish that. And then the other is where does each one have to be different, right? So where do each one sort of differentiate themselves? So we know we need a unique solution for that silo to help drive that forward, right? So, with the brewery, it's all about making sure the TVs and point of sale system are on on game time on Sundays. And, with our TRG business, it's making sure we understand how to operate most efficiently, through our sales cycle, through our operations team. So those are the things that we're really looking for.
It's fascinating to think about the different businesses that you're involved in and how you can stream the common theme through each of those businesses around digital transformation. It's fascinating. So I'd like to pose to both of you, Magic and Joe, for this particular session, we really want to talk about organizational change. And when you think about digital transformation, how do you make that happen through organizational change? So I'm interested to find out, what does organizational change mean to you? And what do you think those components are? So I'll start with you, Magic.
Yeah. So for me, obviously, I have the fortune to be part of a number of large transformation initiatives, and especially the OCM components. For me, OCM to a lot of people can mean, okay, it's system adoption, okay, it's training, it's go live support, but oftentimes it's considered a one-time event. It's considered, something, oh, now we have to do it. But to me, OCM also means it's a long-term commitment, right? Especially given the speed of change that's happening, especially that a lot of transformations enabled by some of the SaaS solutions, whatnot. There's a lot of changes happen once after the implementation is done. So you need that ongoing focus for OCM. The other thing to think about, right, is it's easy, right, to make people think, okay, now it's gone live, I have to use the system because my boss says so. But it's much harder to fundamentally change the mindset, change the behavior. And that does take a lot of time and investment from the organization. But to me, that's one of the secret to successful OCM is have that long-term commitment from the leadership to drive that change over a long haul of period of time.
And Joe, I imagine that you have really run across this in all of your years in the key roles that you've played. How would you characterize organizational change and how to drive that?
Yeah, I think if you're doing it well, I think Magic said it really well in terms of thinking about the long term. What we did is when we set out our roadmap, it was a multi-year roadmap, right? First year is foundational. A lot of that is new system adoption, a big one-time ERP implementation event, right? Where you get to the end of that and you've got support. But really what you hope happens and empowering your people is when you get these new systems in place and you get them trained up on them, you start then in your next phases to think about now how I can use these new systems to drive efficiencies or drive revenue or do some process better than we did yesterday, right? And in a way, they can help become their own change agents, right? Because in their areas, they're starting to see, oh, look at the capability this business or this system gave me. I might be able to take this function that we do right now that has 2 manual processes and be able to digitize it. And, away we go. We've actually driven a lot of inefficiencies out of the process, right? Or even better is when somebody realizes I could take some of this new functionality and maybe we can create a new service out of it that we can upsell to some of our clients. And that's when it really gets powerful. By the way, that's also the way to get your ownership on board, right? They really like it when you bring those ideas that can drive some top line revenue.
Exciting, I think, for staff, when you think about staff embracing change to the extent that they can actually move that top line, it's exciting. So a follow-up to that might be how, when you think of the most critical mindset to OCM, how do you foster that? How do you foster that within your organization? So Magic, I'll point that question to you.
Yes. So from a fostering standpoint, I think my experience has been that you have to also first understand your audience, right? Usually you have three personas type, right? You have the executive, then you have the IT team or the sysadmin team that's using the new system or whatever solution that's being implemented. Then there's also the employees. I think for each of the audience, you probably have to have different strategy, different approach, different communication, and your focus is very different. But at the end of the day, I think what we need to really focus on and foster is that it's a fundamental change, right? There's reason why we call this initiative transformation, with the hope that, hey, we're changing something, right? Like a lot of companies, because of the pandemic and whatnot, they need to do transformation. People can come back to work physically, so they need to have transformation in place, solution in place. But that's just a one-time thing again, right? So how do you foster that fundamental mindset change, and that will impact some of the decision making, right, going forward for the business, so that you can truly enable that change, enable that transformation for a long time to come, versus, oh, now the trigger, the event is over, now we switch back to the old behavior.
I'm hearing this similar theme between the two of you, is really helping staff not only embrace the change, but making them a trusted advisor. Have you found anything specific, Joe, on the best way to foster that with your employees?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. So one is you got to be open and listen to ideas. And also, I think it's good to foster an environment where if somebody fails, you maybe actually celebrate that as opposed to push it down or don't talk about it. Because here you had an employee that might have taken a risk and maybe it didn't pan out, but you're trying to get that behavior ingrained in your organization. So can you do that? And another really interesting thing that I've done in the past at other organizations is we have like an innovation day where like literally we create an event where the employees can actually make whatever idea they want go, and they get 24 hours to go do it. And then the next day they get to come back and present those ideas, and the executive staff has to be bought in and be there and present and listen to the ideas. And then, try to implement, somewhere between 15 and 20% of the ideas that come out of there, because you could create this event where you're going to get all this great energy. People are starting to see like the things that maybe could be, and this is where a lot of times when we talk about real technical change, this is where when you got new technologies, you can go play with them risk-free and see what they would look like in your business. And so having something like that in your organization can really go a long way, because you really, on that day, you flip roles, right? Usually it's the executive staff setting the agenda, pushing down the activity. And this is one where really, the employees are bringing the energy, the ideas, and now the management's got to react to those. So, and then if you can take one of those and embrace it and then really celebrate it when one of those goes to production, that this came from the employees, it can really create a really good culture and environment.
Yeah, I definitely echo Joe's point here, because when it comes to innovation, comes to transformation, things can be very fragile when they first get implemented, right? There can be areas of improvement. So I think as the management, as the executive, have to protect that. And it's not easy, to Joe's point, can you tolerate some of the imperfection and continue to improve it? Do we celebrate failure as long as we learn from it? Do we celebrate incremental successes, right? Because a lot of times in IT, people will forget about all the small wins that we have accomplished along the way. Those are, I think, very important to foster that change culture.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I know that I've spoken with other people about innovation days, and we've actually even tried it at Alcor. And it can be difficult to get participation. But Joe, I really like your idea of taking a portion of those ideas and implementing them and really showing the executive investment in those ideas. I think that's fascinating. That's wonderful. So let's switch gears a little bit. I'm thinking about you're talking about all of the different companies that are part of the TruWest organization, and they're small to mid-size, each of them. Would you characterize it as having same problems with maybe with a smaller budget? And how do you make that budget work?
Yeah, I would categorize it. You have all the same problems, and you generally have a little bit smaller budget. Anytime you go through a transformation project, whether it be as large as an ERP, rip and replace type of thing, or as small as, hey, you're upgrading a phone system because you want different technology to, work there. There's always a process that you got to go through, right? There's, the first analysis, what's going to work. There's choosing a platform. Then there's, okay, getting people excited to go actually execute the project. And then there's the process of executing, finding the issues and the landmines that, you didn't see at the beginning, dealing with them, and then launching, and then stabilizing after the launch, right? That sort of post-launch production, because that's really when the rubber meets the road, and there's always something that pops in that area. So you definitely have the same problems. You definitely have a little less budget because you're not a large organization that's going to, take a team of dedicated people or go to a consulting company and bring in a whole bunch of folks. You're going to probably bring in an implementer that's going to help you along the way. You're probably going to pick a couple of key people and dedicate them to that project. But then everybody else is probably going to be splitting some of their time between their normal day job and understanding what the new system, that whatever the transformation you're going through is going to do to their part of the organization. And, they got to help shepherd that through, make sure the requirements are right, make sure we're not doing anything that's going to stop, money from being collected or us billing or product from being shipped out. And then make sure once we launch that they can get their teams educated, right? So, and that does provide that. It does put a lot of stress on your organization because you're going to ask a lot of people to be doing some double duty while you're going through that.
Well, that leads me to wonder, how do you form that core team to drive that transformation? When you think about the stress and you think about business as usual, how do you pick those people to build that core team?
So for me, you've got your dedicated folks, right? There, you're generally going to pick somebody from IT who knows how all the back end systems work, and it's probably somebody that's been with you for a while, right? And knows it. You're probably going to pick somebody from your operations team that kind of knows how it's all working in real time, right? And the real time problems. And that's probably base minimum, right? You also really want a dedicated project manager, right? Because you need somebody to herd the cats in terms of, running the project, knowing what all the tasks are, most importantly, doing the issue management, right? And understanding as we find issues, are they showstoppers? Are they just highs, right? Are they mediums? Are they lows? And that way the project teams can then, prioritize the time, because you don't have dedication from the rest of the folks. They need to really know what's important to work on, right? And so that's why those criticals and highs become really important, right? If it's a critical, you're not launching without it. Everybody's got to stop and huddle and figure out what's going on. Most likely, you're probably not going to launch with the highs either. So we almost kind of view those as one and the same. And then when you get to your mediums, that's where you start to have some really good discussions with the teams. It'd be like, hey, maybe I launch and there's a slight manual thing I've got to do until that can be a fast follower and it can be fixed, but you can still launch and get there and get moving, right? And there's a little bit of an art to that. So that's why a dedicated project manager who's really good at that will be key to your project team in any sort of digital transformation project. And then other than that, you are really trying to identify the key knowledge people and the key influencer in each other department that really need to be a part of it. And that team needs to make sure they're minimally, meeting once or more than once a week, for normal project statuses, that they know how to go work. Each issue and ownership is key there to make sure people walk out and know they own a problem. They might not have to solve it themselves, but they got to own the process of getting the people together to go solve it and then present that back. And then, from there, there's all the upward executive support, and that really becomes my job, working with that project team and understanding, okay, where we are in the project, how many critical highs, how are we, what's our velocity of issues being closed, and does that line up with what we want to launch? And then, talking to the ownership about where we are, what challenges we have ahead of us. And most oftentimes they want to help. So making sure that when I have an ask where maybe we need an extra resource, or maybe we need a consultant in a specific area because, we thought we could figure out it and learn it, but we're just banging our heads against the wall. And we just, we need to pay the piper, go get the expensive resource, come in, help us solve our problem, and then move on, right? And that's where they can be really helpful, is helping us, work through some of those issues. And when we've got to make, maybe a tough budgetary decision, they can be part of it and help us figure it out.
Wow. And really picking those core people and then trying to make it fun, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's where the alcohol comes in. We'll talk about more.
The alcohol definitely does play a part.
So Magic, I'm really interested in hearing from you on this. I know you've helped other organizations with OCM when you talk about digital transformation. We've got several clients who are going through major transformations. Can you share your experience with both large and small companies when you think about budgetary and OCM? Absolutely.
Because one would think that, from large and small, to Joe's point, right? It's different budget, sometimes different expectations. Things can be very different. But my experience has been that actually there are a lot of common problems across not problems, I would say, challenges we all have to face. And for example, and it's very consistent, right? With what we're seeing in the technology landscape is that the more and more I see that expectation to see quicker result, right? In the past, you would think, okay, ERP system, it's going to take years to implement. But nowadays, I think the business demands, month after 3-4 months, I want to see result. I want to see incremental value from my investment. And now I know that from a technology standpoint, the technology, the OEMs, and these SaaS platforms are making it a lot easier to consume their services, to consume the features, right? But people are still people. There's still the OCM component that needs to be there to make sure the organization is ready to accept the change, right? So I think it presents probably a new challenge for any management team, is that how do I balance that expectation, right? That the business demands quicker result, but knowing that for a wholesale change or transformation, it's going to take time to do proper OCM, to really, to Joe's point, to implement it properly and to remediate all the risk identified and whatnot, right? That's what I'm seeing. The other thing is also, because of the power, right, of these technology in the platform, all the time digital transformations focus on visibility, it's focused on communication and efficiency, and it focuses on also bringing in different departments all together. Now, some of the things that we run into when we are supporting transformation initiative for other organizations is that, a lot of time the cross-departmental, their communication is not very consistent, right? So that brings another layer of, to Joe's point, right, foster your team, right, or building your team for the transformation initiative. One thing I would suggest the audience to look at is, hey, if it's a truly cross-departmental initiative, let's say it's HR, IT, facility, and whatnot, have representative from each of the organization, because to Joseph's point, everybody wants to help, right? In an initiative driven by company, everybody wants to contribute. So it's important to engage those stakeholders early on, have them to be part of the team, and have this establish a communication cadence, right? So that toward the end, everybody's very clear, right, on the expected outcome. And then also everybody is bought into the vision that they can help influence the change on an ongoing basis.
And that they're part of that solution.
Yep.
How important is it to show results soon and often?
In terms of,
Joe.
Yeah,
Yes.
Joe, yeah.
I think one is, as you are moving through your project, it's definitely important to show progress in the project. But once you've launched, it's really important to define a couple of metrics that you felt you were going to move and show that they're moving, because that's what really builds the trust. That's what really gets people excited to do the next thing. And then it also, if you know you're doing that when you get to the end, it keeps you hyper focused on it while you're doing the project, right? And so you don't miss when you get to the end. So, those would be, things that I would make sure you understand as you go in. It's like, hey, I expect, this to happen. This should go faster. I should do more revenue. I should do, there's got to be some sort of business benefit to doing these projects, right? Otherwise, why are we doing them? Because I will tell you, none of these are for the faint of heart. They are usually hard projects. There's usually stress and blood and sweat and tears. And, if it's not worth it at the end, why are we going through all that, right? And so you want to make sure when you're painting the picture of where you're going, when you get there, you measure that, and then you show those results.
You identify those drivers early, and then you show results often.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So let me ask both of you, and I'll start with Joe on this one. What are some of the things that have surprised you during your major digital transformation projects?
Well, I will say, in my last couple, I've been doing this for a long time, right? So I've been in the industry since '93. I've seen a lot of digital transformation. I mean, mainframes to client server to internet, internet to mobile. You throw big data and artificial intelligence in there, right? Like we've done a lot in the last 30 years when it comes to technology. But really, the thing that really always gets me is, this is the OCM piece is probably the either underfunded or mismanaged piece of a lot of these projects. And it's where, if you do it well, you can save yourself a lot of problems. And I think it is, I understand why it's easy, right? Because, everybody gets into, okay, what kind of system am I put in? What do I got to code? What do I got to configure? What data do I need to migrate, right? How do I got to QA it? Like all of those things go into it. And then, then you get to the point where the system's about ready to launch. And now you're starting to think, oh my God, how am I going to roll this out? Like you're almost waiting to the end. So as you start a project, once you've done this enough times, you realize that's something that it's got to be in your planning from day one. And I think, that's probably early on in my career, probably the biggest mistakes that I made. And it was more because I was, focused on the systems, and that kind of caught me at the end. And then you realize all the headaches, because that's where you go through user adoption. Like, okay, I'm putting in a new system. People don't want to use maybe the new system because they're used to the old system. And right. So like, if you can bring them along sooner, faster, the better off you're going to be.
So along those same lines, and maybe I'll throw you a curveball on this one, but when you're going through a digital transformation project and you find a surprise, something that you didn't anticipate, how do you handle OCM with that?
Do you want to me?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll go to Magic.
I would say very carefully. One of the things that you want to do when you get a surprise or an issue is, especially as an executive, and I think this is a hard thing for us to do, is be calm. Understand the problem thoroughly before you act, because I think as executives, we have a tendency to want to come in with a hammer sometimes. Sometimes just helping your employee talk a problem through solves the problem. They figure it out on their own, right? And by the way, when they do, now you've got a really coachable event and something that you can praise them for, to say, great job in figuring that out, and you're raising them up, right? You're still trying to build the next leadership. And by the way, just as an aside, is I almost think every senior executive needs to run one of these types of projects. You got to get under your belt, because you have to understand this to really do, executive level work, because you have to know how hard it is. So being that, and then when that issue, let's say you can't solve it, that's when you really got to walk through your options, right? And understand, okay, is this a showstopper? Can I recover? Do I have to move a date? Because a lot of times when you're doing change management, you're working toward a date, and it's really hard to go and tell your organization you're now pushing back 30 days, right?
Or a year.
Or a year, or whatever it is, right? So you need to be extremely thoughtful, when you're going to pull the trigger on something like that, especially if it means a major impact to the project. But don't be afraid, because sometimes waiting that 30 days, or hope, God forbid, it's not a year, right? But let's say you got to push back 30 days to get something right. You're going to be way better off than had you launched, and now you've got a major production problem that is now live and on fire, and you're trying to figure it out as you go along, right? That's when people aren't going home at night. They're trying to solve it because it's impacting real people, real production, and you're trying to solve it as fast as you can. So that's where your judgment and that's where you get tested, right? So to me, that is the most thing, is be calm, understand your options, and do the right thing for the project and the people and your company, even if it means having to deliver bad news, right?
That's wonderful. So Magic, with your journey, a little bit different than Joe's, but certainly as you've been working closely with organizations who go through these kinds of changes, what are some of the things that have surprised you during your journey?
Well, I would say, having done this many times, I've experienced many things, and anything can happen, right? Regardless, how smooth or how simple it seems on paper, something will happen along the way. So I think in order to, because I'm not saying will eliminate, right, all the surprises that you'll find in a project, but at least from a planning standpoint, to Joe's point, from the beginning, we have to assume that there's going to be surprises, right? So assuming the surprise will happen, what should we do? Do we have enough buffer, right? Have we set enough expectation with the executive upfront that, hey, here's the buffer, here's the plan, how we're going to address it? We don't know, right, what's going to happen. And so I think if we can, in our plan, in OCM included, right, if we include that type of assumptions, I think will go a long way to reduce the level of alcohol consumption when things come up, so
Maybe not.
yeah. The other thing is, to Joe's point, right? What I'm seeing, sometimes the roadblock, the most surprisingly, is communication. It comes down to the simplest thing, right? Again, you would think that, not just cross department, even within the same department, you would think people are communicating all the time. There's a team, there's a messenger, there's email. But oftentimes when it comes to larger initiatives, that constant communication is sometimes lacking if we don't pay attention to. That oftentimes lead to the last minute surprises. Oh, this thing has never been communicated to me. Oh, I assume X, Y, and Z. This is not working, right? So I think oftentimes we, as a third party, we become that bridge to the client to say, hey, this is really very important for everybody to be in these meetings. And sometimes we actually have to push back the timeline to slow down the project to say, guys, we have to get aligned before we move to the next stage. And to Joe's point, don't be afraid to communicate, because I think and communicate to leadership that there's going to be a delay of the project, because guess what? If we don't take those steps, the outcome doesn't meet the expectation of some of the key stakeholders. Like I said, that will definitely increase the level of alcohol consumption later on.
It's reminded me of the construction term. I don't know if you know this, but I love to flip houses. And one of the terms that I've become familiar with years ago was measure twice, cut once. And that's, I feel like you guys are saying this is make sure you're communicating early and often before you move into those really critical implementation steps where you may have made assumptions that are maybe wrong assumptions. Okay.
Yep.
So this has been a question by many. So I'm going to start with you. How should one plan their first step into digital transformation?
So I think the first step is really being aligned with your business goals. One of the things that when you get into like a role like mine, CIO, you are a trusted advisor amongst your team. But I think what, gone are the days when, the head nerd was just in charge of making sure the email and the network worked, right? We are now really at a role where we can advise our business and how they can run it better, more efficiently, or maybe drive more revenue through the use of technology, or technology innovation, or whatever we want to do there, right? However we want to talk about it. So the first thing as the CIO or the person who is going to be in charge of the digital project is to really understand the business goals and what you're going after, right? So now you've got to understand what needles you need to move on the business side, and then from there the steps are going to be the same, right? You're evaluating where what's holding you back from moving those needles right now. Where can I make changes to do that? Where does a new system need to be put in place? Where does a new capability that you didn't have before need to be put in place, right? This is, as we've walked through, the world of websites and mobile and big data, we've all had to make those decisions in our business. When was the right time to launch a website for the first time and be an online presence? Should we do an app? Does it need to be native? Should it, right? All of those things you got to think through. And then that's where you can really start to provide value to your business, because if you can come back to say, hey, here are the technologies and here's the steps we take, and I think if we do these, we're going to drive the needle on these sort of business metrics. That's where you're having really good conversations and you're bringing value to that executive staff.
Wonderful. So are you still there, Joe? Okay, I think you froze for just a second. So as a CIO, what do you see as the biggest challenge behind that? And how can that be turned to an opportunity for the future?
To me, the biggest challenge is understanding that it never stops. You are constantly looking at it. And I'll use an example from from here is, we're doing some really, some basic, well, I don't know if to say basic stuff, but it's new to our business, right? So this year we're launching a website for the first time where customers who used to have to call a sales rep to always get their order and maybe want to do that online now can, right? And there's some interesting things that'll happen there. Well, it might free up the sales guy to sell more stuff to new clients, right? We might be able, the website itself might actually be able to entice through suggestions and whatnot, more stuff, right? We're doing more with digital marketing and marketing engines. And why is that important, right? Well, now we can farm our CRM to maybe take existing accounts that we have and expand them with more services that we offer, and actually make suggestions to our sales team about, hey, there's opportunities to go do that. And so it's building that roadmap and making sure that those tools and capabilities constantly are getting in there. So for us, last year it was very foundational. We did, ERP, we put in a marketing engine, we're putting in a website. When I looked at 2022, it's going to be about data quality and, we'll call it data warehousing for now, but it's really about business intelligence and data visualization and how we can use our data to help our customers manage their devices better. But it also might make other opportunities for us available. Like, for instance, our sales guys might not know devices are like coming up under warranty. So there's actually a sales opportunity that they could go after. So there's a lot of things that we're doing, and we know we've done some really good foundational things. We're launching some new capabilities this year that are going to allow us to interact with our consumer differently. And then next year, we're really wanting to delve into the data warehousing BI level. So we know we have that roadmap there. And for 2023, there's going to be more, right? I just don't know what that is yet.
Exactly.
We're not looking past a year. So, but it's constantly coming and going. And the business may ask you at some point, are you going to be done? And I think we're probably never done, right? There's probably always some level investment to keep our business either current, healthy, new, right? That we want to put in there. And it's a lot of times at this point going to be through technology, where those investments are going to be made.
Magic, that's such a good point. We've talked a lot about changing culture. So when you think about ongoing digital transformation, things never really stop changing. How do you build a change resilient culture to drive successful change?
Well, from my standpoint, I think be receptive to change. That particular mindset, well, it's not it comes down to individual, and then it comes down to the team, right? And that also means transparency. That means an open culture, right? Where the need for change can be discussed openly up and down the organizational food chain. And Joe made the point earlier, right? That the business has to be able to tolerate some of the risk from trial and error in order to, because some of the change, initially it's very fragile, right? It's going to cost something. So at that point in time, what's the organizational culture to embrace that, right? Sometimes, things will get shut down prematurely. Sometimes, we allow it to grow and be part of the evolution. So I think building that is going to be critical. And then it also starts with the leadership in the organization, right? The leader has to show it by example, and then also the management, the leaders of the companies. So start there, step by step. Yeah.
Yeah, and Joe did mention being okay with failure and actually applauding, the attempts and the willingness to dive in. So last question before we get to our Q&A session. Joe, if you had to do it over again, what is the one piece of advice you would give to make digital transformation core to driving value for companies?
Well, I think we mentioned it plenty of times on this call, and we're a brewery, so buy more alcohol. Figure out how much you need, buy twice as much. It's going to be good for our business. It'll be good for your team. But one is the one piece of advice I would give: you're going through a digital transformation project that requires new systems. The one thing that I would say to really focus on, you're going to focus on your normal project, but it's that post-implementation phase because what generally happens is you do a whole bunch of training, everybody forgets like what they just got trained on, right? And then you have too few bodies that people are asking, how do I do that job again? Somebody has to show them how. At the same time, when you go live, there are always issues to deal with, right? And so oftentimes that team sometimes gets really stressed out because there's not enough to go around, right? And you don't have that part of your project figured out. So as I go through that, that would probably, at least in my last one, that was probably the area that we probably didn't put enough effort into. So that would be my advice is, for a smooth rollout, make sure you've really invested in that post-production support.
Excellent. And Magic, what would you say if you had to do it over again? What's the one piece of advice you would give?
I think some of that is covered in this session, but I would say building that business benefit tracking or the value statement upfront, and continuously update it and track it and monitor it and report on it. I think it's critical as part of the OCM. It's also critical to get that continuous commitment and sponsorship from the business, from your leaders.
Oh, that's awesome. So we do have a couple of questions. We'll go into a Q&A session now. So for Joe, how would you define the checkpoints while strategizing a transformation to happen? And what would you consider as primary resources to measure those results?
Okay, so I'm going to break that up into two areas, and I hope this will answer the question the person's asking. So one is there's checkpoints around a digital transformation project that you're taking on, right? So, my feeling is you want to take checkpoints weekly. You're probably giving updates to your executive staff on at least a bi-weekly basis. And when you get close to launch, you're probably dialing that to weekly. So that's when you have the one-time events that Magic talked about earlier. But then you have the process of building your roadmap, communicating to your staff, to the executive team where you want to go. You might be even working with your executive staff on this because hopefully you're in partnership with them, and that's something that to me happens at least once a quarter. Like I do a major check-in with my ownership, that includes my CFO, my chief marketing person, all the ownership. We talk about our security program first and foremost, because that underlines all of the digital transformation that we do. If you're, putting more things into your sort of, your digital systems, you need to make sure you have a good security program that's sort of governing and managing that. And then we talk about each individual areas and where we want to go. Like, what are we trying to do in marketing in the next, next future, or, this quarter, next quarter, and the following quarter, right? What are we trying to do with our sales team and making sure we understand our pipeline better, or forecasting is better, and how can I use technology to go after that? And then, our operations team, what kind of things are we trying to drive there? So you have like one nice big checkpoint. Now, all along the way, you're probably working with those individuals to make sure that when you walk in, that it's basically just a summarization of things you've been working on already with them and the visions that you're working on with them. I during the year, I get a lot out of when I walk in, either my chief marketer or my chief finance guy, like, hey, I've been thinking about your problem and here might be a solution, right? And then that starts a really good conversation. And depending on the result of that conversation, something might get on a roadmap or something might be taken off, right? Depending on how we go about it. So that is where you really want to be that trusted advisor to the organization.
And work collaboratively with those other key areas.
And those major checkpoints really are there to get everybody just realigned on where you're going, with each thing.
That's awesome. Thank you for that question. And Joe, thank you for that answer. So Magic, I've got a question here from the audience. When you go by proposing change management while digitally transforming workflow or bringing a whole digitization to something, what kind of a backup you and your team plan to ensure maximum damage control in worst case scenarios? So this sounds like somebody who's had experience.
Yeah. Lots of alcohol consumption after that.
Yeah.
Probably.
Stay with the theme.
Yes. I think we probably covered that as part of the session as well. I would say anything can happen, right? During any type of project, any type of change. But to some extent, build some resiliency, build some buffer into your project, into your planning, right? Whether it's people, whether it's your process, and even from a technology standpoint, right? Because what's the worst can happen, right? Nothing changes, the status quo. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of alcohol thrown at the project team if that actually happens. But if we think in terms of business outcome, right? What's the business outcome? Are we prepared for that? I think building that resiliency into the plan and constantly adjust that. I think that's where Joe's point, right? As being a dedicated project manager, in addition to constantly updating the plan, that person, along with the core team, that should be on the top agenda every single week. Okay, are there potential surprises coming up? What's our backup plan, right? Just constantly debate with each other and identify those risks early, communicate with the business stakeholders early. I think that with that, hopefully that will limit the amount of surprises. There's still gonna be, you can never eliminate that.
I've heard you both talk about having key people in key positions, building that core team to be able to drive organizational change that you can't do it on your own. I've heard you talk about organizational change management and communicating early and communicating often. And part of that communication is making sure that the entire organization is talking to each other around a large scale transformation, but then also communicating against those key business drivers that initiated the change to begin with. Anything else that you guys want to talk about in summary as we wrap this up?
I just, good luck to everybody, right? It's,
Yes.
there's a lot of change that happens. It only gets faster. What I would say is, in summary, is, as a technical leader, making sure you're keeping yourself educated on what is coming up, what are potential new technologies that you could be taking advantage of, or there might be some existing technologies that you could be taking advantage of. Like I mentioned, we are literally launching a website, not a website, but like an e-commerce store, right? That's, very like 2010, right? But it's a technology that will actually help our customers interact with us in a much better way. So we're taking advantage of it, right? But there might be other things in terms of, artificial intelligence and big data and, all of that stuff that you can take advantage of that can really help drive your business forward. So make sure you're staying up to speed on what all those things are, and making sure that you are coming back to your business with suggestions that's wrapped around driving a business benefit, right? Whether it be efficiency, revenue, or some other benefit that they are seeking.
Yeah, but definitely echo everything Joe just said. The one thing I would add to that is oftentimes the technology, it comes down to people, process, technology. The technology change oftentimes ahead of people and process and ahead of what an organization can embrace. So to Joe's point, as a technologist, we have to carefully assess, right? Even though there's maybe a fancy platform, amazing feature out there, is our organization ready to embrace that? If not, how do we get there first before rolling out a larger transformation initiative? And that's, to me, that's part of OCM upfront.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it has been a pleasure speaking with the both of you. Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
for
you very much,
attending.
Pam.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Pamela. Bye.